You ever have one of those moments where time slows down, not in some cheesy, poetic way, but like your brain wants to make sure you never, ever forget what just happened? Yeah, that happened to me. Right there on 9th and Halberd Street. Middle of a grey Thursday afternoon, crowd gathered, people smiling. And then, him. Let me set the scene before I get ahead of myself. I'd been doing my usual routine on the corner, street performing, juggling plastic bowling pins with duct-taped handles, wearing an old checkered vest and a floppy top hat that looked like it had survived a war. My name's Tommy, and yeah, I'm that guy. The one people point at and go, is this performance art or a breakdown? But the truth? It's neither. Or maybe both. I crack jokes, I mime invisible walls. Sometimes I balance on a shopping cart and pretend it's a spaceship. Kids laugh, adults drop coins. Some people whisper "poor guy" like I can't hear them, others actually stop and say I made their day. That Thursday was normal, overcast, slight drizzle. I was mid-cartwheel when I heard the engine. Not just any car, you feel when it's something expensive. Low hum, glossy, intimidating. The black SUV turned the corner like it owned the street and stopped right at the edge of the crowd. Out stepped a man who looked like money and smelled like ego. Slick grey suit, designer shades even though the sun hadn't shown itself in hours, a Rolex that could pay my rent for 5 years, hair like it had been sculpted by Michelangelo himself. And the kicker, I knew exactly who he was, Leon Hartwell, tech mogul, billionaire, creator of the Chirpy app or Snippy or whatever soulless platform he was trending for that week. I only knew because people never stopped talking about him like he was the second coming of Steve Jobs, minus the charm. He stepped out, glanced at the crowd, then at me. I felt his eyes crawl over me like I was a roach on his glass countertop. Then he said it, loud, clear, like he wanted it to echo. "Get a job, clown, this isn't talent, it's trash." The laughter around me stopped, like someone pressed mute on the city. I froze. Halfway through a pose, my hands still raised, knees bent in a ridiculous squatting stance. A juggling pin rolled to my feet like it was embarrassed for me. Leon smirked, reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill, crumpled it into a tight ball and tossed it at my feet. "That's charity? Buy yourself some dignity." Now, I've had people spit at me. I've had kids steal my hat mid-act. I've had drunk guys try to fight me because they thought I was mocking them. But this was different, because it wasn't hate. It was dismissal, like I wasn't even human, just a speck on his designer shoes. I bent down, picked up the $100, smoothed it out slowly. The whole street was still holding its breath. I looked up at him, smiled the widest smile I could, and said, "It pays more than your soul does." A few people gasped. One lady whispered, "Oh, damn." Someone dropped their phone. Leon didn't say anything, just narrowed his eyes and walked off, slipping into his SUV like he had better places to be. The door slammed, the engine roared, and that was that. Or so I thought, because apparently someone was recording the whole thing from across the street. And 24 hours later, I was the most talked about clown on the internet. I didn't think much of it the next morning. Woke up under the same awning I'd been curling under for weeks, back aching, knees sore, cardboard still wet from the drizzle. I gathered my props, did a couple shoulder rolls and figured I'd head to my regular corner. Maybe today I'd try the invisible stairs bit again. It always got a laugh from the kids. But the minute I passed the first coffee shop, something was off. A barista glanced up, did a double take, then whispered something to a customer. The guy turned, looked at me, blinked wide, and smiled. Then outside the metro, 2 teens passed me. One pointed, pulled out their phone and said, "Yo, that's him, the clown guy from the video." Video? I kept walking, but phones were coming out like wildfire. One lady asked if she could take a selfie with me. A dude offered to buy me lunch. Some guy in a hoodie shouted across the street, "Legend, bro! Absolute legend!" I was officially confused. I finally stopped at a newsstand, one of those old-school ones with a cracked digital screen rotating through headlines, and there it was. Clown V's billionaire trends worldwide after tech mogul insults street performer. Below it, a grainy freeze frame of me mid-bow, crumpled bill at my feet, Leon's smug face frozen mid-laugh. Right under that, it pays more than your soul does. A line heard round the internet. My stomach dropped. I leaned in. The clip was only 43 seconds long, but someone had filmed the whole thing, wide angle, clear sound, perfect timing, and people had run with it. The internet was tearing into Leon Hartwell like a shark pack on raw meat. On Twitter, people were calling me a philosopher in grease paint. TikTokers were reenacting the scene. Memes popped up by the second. I saw one where my face was photoshopped onto a knight slaying a golden dragon wearing Leon's head. The caption read, "When the jester exposes the king." It was wild, but I'll admit it. It felt good. I kept reading. Late-night hosts had already roasted Leon on their monologues. Leon Hartwell. Net worth $12 billion, soul value 3.47 and a pack of gum. One tweet showed his smug face next to a dumpster fire. The replies were savage. But what hit harder? Investors started commenting. Analysts wrote that the incident reflected Hartwell's long-standing tone, deafness toward the common man. PR firms speculated on lasting brand damage. Suddenly it wasn't just a meme. It was a crack, one that threatened to split open a whole empire. But Leon, he wasn't worried. A day later, he held a press conference at some overpriced rooftop bar. I watched the live stream on a stranger's phone. He stepped up to the mic, sipped water like it was beneath him, and said, "I was joking. Come on, people are too sensitive these days. It'll pass. It'll pass." That smug, condescending smirk never left his face. But here's the thing about the internet. It doesn't pass. It digs. And when it did, it started pulling up everything. Anonymous threads popped up. Former employees, whistleblowers, engineers, inventors, coders, all hinting at something deeper. Contracts buried, names erased, ideas stolen. And as the dust started to clear, one name kept floating to the top. Mine. I wasn't always a guy in a ragged vest juggling old junk for coins on a city corner. There was a time, not too long ago, when I wore clean shirts, spoke in conference rooms, and had my name on the glass door of a lab that smelled like solder and fresh ambition. Back then, people called me Dr. Thomas R. Ellison, Tommy. Only to those who really knew me. I wasn't rich, but I was fulfilled. I worked at a research and development firm called Neurodyne, one of those fast-rising subsidiaries under the umbrella of Hartwell Industries, Leon's tech empire. We were building something special, a robotic exosuit for disabled children. Lightweight, intuitive, cost-effective. It could restore partial mobility to kids with neuromuscular conditions. It was the kind of project that didn't just change lives, it gave them back. And I wasn't the only one who believed in it. Nurses, parents, pediatricians, they all saw the potential. The feedback from early trials was overwhelming. Kids who could barely lift a spoon were walking in our lab. The local paper even did a piece on us. I remember thinking, this might be the greatest thing I ever do. But then the meetings started, the ones with the suits. They didn't understand the tech, and worse, they didn't care. They wanted projections, margins, scalability. One day, a high-ranking executive flew in from Hartwell Industries. He wore a gold watch and didn't shake hands. He stayed silent through the presentation, nodding here and there, pretending to care. At the end, he said just 6 words. "It's noble, but it won't scale." A week later, we were told the project was being redirected. 2 weeks after that, we were told it was being suspended. And 3 days after that, I walked into the lab and found my access badge deactivated, my workstation wiped, my name scrubbed from the servers, every email gone. They'd shut it all down, or so I thought. Months later, when I was still jobless, behind on rent and sleeping in my car, I saw a press release on a tech blog. Hartwell Industries had announced Project NeuroCore, a revolutionary new mobility aid that used some familiar phrasing, same specs, same design, even the same tagline I had written on a whiteboard one night while staring at a photo of my niece who had cerebral palsy. and under the big bold headline was a name: Leon Hartwell. Inventor, visionary. He'd patented my work, the man who never set foot in my lab, the man who laughed at a struggling street performer on a sidewalk. That was the day something in me cracked, not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet snapping, like a wire pulled too tight for too long. I didn't scream, I didn't call a lawyer, I didn't even tell anyone. What would I say? Instead, I disappeared. From the news, from the industry, from myself. I became Tommy the street clown, not because I wanted to be a symbol, not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed to be no one for a while. It was easier to perform in front of strangers than explain what had been taken from me. Then that SUV rolled up to the curb, and Leon stepped out and called me trash in front of a dozen strangers, and I told him it paid more than his soul did. Back then I didn't know anyone had filmed it, but when the clip went viral, when people started digging into Leon's past, they found more than just headlines and quarterly earnings. They found me. Old colleagues reached out, former interns, journalists, even a single father whose son had worn one of our early exosuits. They remembered. They had records, emails, notes, prototypes. And then the blog post started. Street performer was once a brilliant engineer. Leon Hartwell accused of stealing life-changing tech from homeless inventor. The real genius behind NeuroCore? They didn't know the half of it, but the world was starting to ask the right questions. And for the first time in years, I stood a little straighter. The first lawsuit hit the morning after the expose aired. Not a blog post, not a viral tweet, a formal lawsuit filed by a former developer from Hartwell's earliest ventures. Her name was Maya Han, and she claimed that Leon had taken credit for a smart sensor project she'd built from scratch. She had emails, prototypes, witnesses, and she wasn't alone. By the end of the week, 5 others had come forward: engineers, designers, junior inventors, people no one remembered, but who had the receipts. One of them had even left the industry after being silenced with an ironclad NDA. Now backed by public outrage and a team of pro bono lawyers, they were ready to talk. Suddenly Leon Hartwell wasn't the visionary billionaire anymore. He was a symbol, a walking, grinning, designer suit-wearing parasite, feeding off people like me, people who created, dreamed, built, and then got discarded. I didn't even speak much during that time. I didn't need to. The world was doing the talking for me. But the invitations started pouring in anyway. Podcasts, radio shows, news segments. Morning talk shows where smiling anchors said things like, "So Tommy, tell us how it feels to go from street performer to hero." I always gave the same answer. I'm not a hero, I'm just a guy who refused to stay silent. And it was true. I didn't want fame, I didn't want revenge, I just wanted the truth to be louder than the lie. The strangest part? I still performed every day, same corner, same cartwheel, same hat. I'd finish a bit, someone would drop a 20 in the can and say, "You changed my life." I'd smile, thank them, and keep going. People asked why. "It reminds me who I am," I told one reporter, "not who they made me." Meanwhile, Leon's empire was cracking like ice under a slow, heavy weight. Big-name sponsors were the first to go, one after another dropping out of his projects, citing ethical concerns. His face vanished from tech conferences, his name was removed from university panels and innovation boards. And then came the boardroom votes. One leaked video showed a private Hartwell Industries meeting. The chairwoman, stoic, sharp, stood at the head of the table and said, "We need to decide if this company is about innovation or about worshipping a myth." Less than 2 minutes later, Leon Hartwell was voted out as CEO. He didn't speak, just sat there, blinking slowly, like it was all a bad dream that hadn't quite caught up to him. By the time the class action suit rolled in, it wasn't even news anymore. Dozens of inventors had banded together. The case was thick with affidavits, old memos, NDA violations, and confidential files someone had anonymously leaked to the press. They didn't just want financial justice, they wanted credit, names restored, projects unburied, histories corrected. And still I juggled, I danced. I mimed my way through invisible walls while the world turned. The truth is, I'd already lost everything once. The fame didn't move me, the money didn't tempt me. But watching people like me finally being heard, that changed me. Some of them even found me. One woman showed up at my corner with her kid in tow and said, "You gave me courage to speak, to demand credit for my work." I didn't say much, just gave her a smile, tipped my hat and said, "Tell your truth." Loud. The media called it the inventor uprising, but for me it was just the moment the world finally stopped clapping for the wrong man. It was the kind of silence that didn't live in libraries or chapels. It echoed inside marble floors and 60th floor glass walls, bouncing off the cold edges of a space built not to be lived in, but to impress. Leon Hartwell sat alone in his penthouse office, though office wasn't quite the word anymore. His name had been scraped off the glass outside. His access card had been reprogrammed. Security had given him one last visit to collect his things, but no one expected him to actually sit in the empty chair. But there he was. No entourage, no assistants, pacing with Bluetooth earpieces, no calls to answer, no screens to swipe, just him, and a silence that mocked every boast he'd ever made. The view hadn't changed. Manhattan still sparkled. The skyline still screamed wealth. But something in it looked different now, like the buildings weren't saluting him anymore. They were watching. On his desk sat a single tablet, and on that screen a paused video. Tommy, wearing a red nose, spinning a tin pie plate on one finger. A crowd of children surrounded him in a public park, laughing, pointing, living. He made silly noises, fell backward into a soft patch of grass. A mother clapped. A father knelt down and dropped a few bills into a little bucket labeled Smiles Fund, 1 giggle at a time. Leon pressed play. Watched Tommy throw an imaginary rope to a little girl who played tug-of-war with him. She won. He collapsed dramatically. The crowd roared. It was ridiculous, cheap, corny, and Leon couldn't stop watching. Tommy was still poor, still wearing worn-out shoes and a faded vest, still juggling scraps and eating cheap sandwiches, but something radiated from him, something Leon hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Tommy had nothing, yet somehow he'd won everything. Leon leaned back in the chair, his last chair, and exhaled like he was deflating. He remembered the applause he used to chase in boardrooms, the headlines that once called him a genius, the speeches at tech summits where people treated him like a prophet, but none of it lasted. None of it filled the hole that was now wide open in his chest. For the first time in his adult life, Leon had no one left to impress, no scandal to fight, no deal to make, no empire to defend, only memories, and a growing awareness that everything he'd built had been balanced on other people's backs. And the one man he'd mocked, the man he'd treated like a joke on a sidewalk, was now a symbol of everything the world was starting to value: humility, authenticity, heart. Leon reached for a folder he hadn't opened in weeks. Inside were legal documents, a quiet draft he'd asked his personal attorney to prepare before the board cut him loose. One page in particular, unsigned, had been rewritten 10 times, a full transfer of patent ownership, backdated, every cent owed, every royalty, every credit. He hadn't sent it, not yet. He didn't know if he was ready, but as the sun dipped behind the skyline and the room grew darker, the glow from the screen played across his face. Tommy doing a goofy bow, Tommy holding hands with a giggling child, Tommy spinning joy from thin air. And for the first time, Leon whispered aloud, not to anyone, but just to the space, "Who won?" There was no answer, just the echo of a man who finally understood the weight of a soul he'd traded for applause. It wasn't a press conference. It wasn't a staged redemption tour. There were no flashing lights, no podium, no expensive suits, no carefully rehearsed speeches, just a small community fair on the edge of the city, kids chasing balloons, paper streamers fluttering in the breeze, a dunk tank that squeaked every time someone hit the bullseye, the smell of funnel cake in the air. It was the kind of place where names didn't matter, just faces, laughter, and moments. Leon Hartwell didn't belong there, and he knew it. He came quietly, dressed in jeans and a plain hoodie, cap pulled low. Not one person recognized him. A year ago that would have bothered him. Now it was a blessing. He moved through the crowd like a ghost, eyes searching, past the bake sale table, past the man handing out cotton candy with pink fingers, past the kids jumping in the bounce house, and then he saw him, Tommy, in his usual tattered vest and floppy hat, face painted with a crooked red smile. He was blowing up a long balloon into the shape of what looked like a giraffe with arthritis, and the kids loved it. He handed it to a little boy who immediately dropped it. Tommy made a show of pretending it exploded, then collapsed dramatically. The crowd laughed. It was gentle, honest, real. Leon waited, watched, and when the crowd thinned, he finally stepped forward. No cameras, no crowd, just the two of them. Tommy turned. The smile didn't drop from his face, but something shifted behind his eyes. Recognition, memory, a flicker of history. Leon didn't speak right away. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, thick, slightly crumpled. His hand trembled as he held it out. "It's everything," he said quietly. "The patent, the credit, the royalties, all of it. Your name, where it always should have been." Tommy didn't move for a moment. He just stared at the envelope like it was a snake that might bite. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it, opened it, skimmed the papers, saw the official stamps, the signatures, his name, his real name, printed in bold on the header. He looked up, not angry, not triumphant, just tired. "Why now?" Leon swallowed hard. His voice cracked for the first time in a long time. "Because I finally ran out of people to impress, and I started looking at the ones I hurt." Tommy held his gaze, said nothing. The silence between them stretched, not hostile, just heavy. Finally, Tommy tucked the papers into his vest and said, "You can't undo what you did." Leon nodded. "I know, but," Tommy added, "you can stop doing it to others." A breath passed between them. Not forgiveness, not absolution, but something closer to beginning again. Tommy turned back toward the fair. A little girl waved at him, shouting, "Clown guy, you forgot the giraffe's tail?" He smiled and walked toward her, already twisting a balloon back to life. Leon stood there for a long moment, then walked away, quietly, like he'd come. Not as the billionaire, not as the mogul, just a man finally learning how to show up. It was a simple building, no flashy signs, no corporate logos, no chrome-plated lobby or glass elevators, just a red brick warehouse tucked behind a forgotten train yard on the edge of the city. The kind of place most people wouldn't glance at twice. But inside, it hummed with life. Young inventors hunched over soldering stations. 3D printers whirred in the corner. Whiteboards were covered in sketches, algorithms, and big, messy dreams. The air smelled like burnt plastic and coffee. Hope in its rawest form. At the center of it all stood a plaque bolted to the wall near the front door. It read, "The Ellison Innovation Foundation built by those they ignored, run by those they underestimated." And just below that, a framed photo weathered from sunlight of a man in a crooked top hat, bowing with exaggerated flair, eyes twinkling with mischief. Tommy, or as the world now knew him again, Dr. Thomas R. Ellison. A year had passed since the fair, since the envelope, since the quiet, tearless apology under the trees. He hadn't taken the payout, not all of it anyway. He'd used it to build this place, not an empire, just a home for people like he once was. People with ideas and nowhere to go, college dropouts, runaways, formerly incarcerated thinkers, homeless tinkerers, outcasts with fire in their minds and nowhere to plug it in. And somewhere in the middle of it all, mopping the floor without being asked, was a man in plain grey clothes, head bowed, moving slow but with purpose. Leon. No one knew his name. Not the interns, not the young inventors, not the volunteers. He never introduced himself. He emptied trash bins, fetched tools, carried parts, swept sawdust from under workbenches. He never gave advice, never claimed a title, but sometimes, when he saw someone struggling, He'd crouch beside them and say quietly, "Try changing the angle," or "Have you checked the resistance on the third pin?" He never took credit, but the ones he helped never forgot. He'd found something here that no boardroom ever gave him: peace. One afternoon, as the sun filtered in through the dusty windows, Tommy stood before a group of teens, holding up an old wrench like it was an award. He was explaining the physics of leverage by balancing it on a pencil when he caught sight of Leon standing at the back, wiping his hands on a towel, listening like a student in the last row. Tommy didn't pause. He didn't point. He just smiled, turned back to the group and said, "The world likes to crown kings. But the truth? Sometimes the clown knows more than the king." The kids laughed. Some clapped. One girl wrote it down in her notebook. Later that day, as Leon locked up for the night, he walked past that photo of Tommy on the wall. He paused, looked at it for a long time. Then he quietly took off his cap, wiped a bit of dust from the frame, and walked out into the night.